Conversations across time, 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 across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations.
And welcome to Conversations Across Time, the program that allows you to witness imaginary, honest, no-holds-barred conversations between historical personalities. These persons, or immortals, if you will, have greatly shaped the conversations and issues of today. Invited guests will be discussing a variety of topics, both past and present. You, the viewer, and I will witness their unscripted interactions. Join me as we become voyeurs to these frank conversations between historical personalities. We will witness what they might have said to each other in a relaxed and casual setting. These conversations impact on today's issues, and that is why you are sitting here as an audience. These conversations across time impact upon the issues of our lives and times. You and I together will get a glimpse into these fascinating personalities. Welcome. I'd like to introduce our panel, and seated next to me, my dear friend, former State Representative Babette Josephs.
My pleasure to be here.
And next to Babette, my personal heroine, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Welcome, First Lady.
Thank you for having me.
And seated next to her is, of course, the
16th President.
16th President of the United States, and very much a hero to me and to all of the audience, and that is President Abraham Lincoln. Welcome, President.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Seated next to President Lincoln is, of course, the individual who was his advisor and who was also someone who was that person sitting on the shoulder of the president, giving him information that he needed to know about African Americans. It is an honor to welcome Mr. Frederick Douglass.
My pleasure, thank you.
So what we're going to do right now is just jump right into where we are today. The United States Supreme Court recently removed several provisions from the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which amended the 1870 Voting Rights Act, which required several states from the Confederacy to get approval before they changed their election laws. Question: should Congress immediately act to restore the provisions to get State Department approval for election laws?
I say yes.
I say yes, but I don't see it happening. I see a Congress, and a lot of this is reflected in state legislatures, particularly in Pennsylvania, where I have a lot of experience. Congress set itself up, particularly the Republicans, so they don't ever have to worry about losing in their divisions, in their districts.
I think that's one of the saddest parts of this whole thing, that we don't have enough confidence in our leaders, our elected leaders, for them to do the right thing, whether it's written or unwritten.
And they don't do the right thing, and the American public has figured that out.
It's an insult to me because this is totally the opposite of what I fought for as president. It seems to me that the roles have changed. The Republican, back in my day, were far more liberal and far more open-minded to ideas of change, but now it seems the Republicans have become now what the Democrats were back in my time. It's very frustrating.
Well, I want to interject something.
Yes.
President Lincoln, it interests me that you would say that this is an affront to your legacy. Did I understand that? Did I understand you say that?
Basically.
And what I'd like to know is that during during your time, did you envision, for instance, African Americans having the right to vote? Did you envision women having the right to vote? And I'd just like you to talk about that.
Women hardly seemed the idea at that time. I understand it's now the case, but African Americans, my initial intention was to give them the right not only to vote.
The men.
Well,
the men, and not only the men who had served in the Civil War. But I'm not going to, I want my guests to talk. So I want to ask
Women
Frederick
served in
Douglass,
the war.
what do you think about this?
Well, let's look at the original Voting Rights Act. The original Voting Rights Act is the 15th Amendment,
Yes.
which was passed by the Congress in 1869, ratified by the states in 1870. And it says that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state
So it
on
didn't,
account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Second, that the Congress shall have the power to implement this article by appropriate legislation. So says the 15th Amendment. The background of the 15th Amendment, how it was passed, is very interesting. We could put a pin on that. But Congress recognized at the time of the passage in 1870 of the 15th Amendment that there would be problems in the states enforcing the 15th Amendment. One of the senators at the time said, let's put in the amendment a prohibition against things like poll taxes, literacy tests, property qualification, or white-only primaries. That was not put in the 15th Amendment. And so we had this history of the Ku Klux Klan and other terrorist organizations attempting to prevent African Americans from voting. Let's fast forward. In the presidential elections of 2008 and 2012, the Republican Party, ironically, went to great pains to prevent millions of Americans from exercising their franchise. So yes, Congress should certainly act immediately to restore Sections 4 and Section 5 of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. Now let me just finish. The 1965 Civil Rights Act was passed in order to prevent the abridgment that had taken place since 1876.
A majority of the people who are in Congress now, who are Republicans, particularly in the House, got elected because the right to vote was abridged.
Yes.
In their districts, in their states, and there is no reason in God's earth for them to reverse that. And I don't believe they will ever change their minds, so I think it's up to us to change their faces.
Well, you're talking about changing people at the polls at election time. I agree with that. The question is whether the United States Supreme Court held appropriately when it removed Section 4 and 5.
Of course not. Of course not.
Now, I want to just, if I can just interject one thing. First Lady, you as a champion beyond what your husband did. I said in the beginning, you're one of my personal heroes. What do you think about what is currently happening with the abridgment? I mean, Mr. Douglass articulates the problem precisely. And certainly Representative Josephs tells us where we are and what's going on. How do you, as someone who was light years beyond what everyone else was doing, how do you feel about this?
well, I certainly feel that the provisions need to be restored, but and one seems to think that what would happen if all those who were disenfranchised would have had the chance to cast their vote. What would the world be like today?
It couldn't be worse than it is today, and it would probably be a great deal better. In Pennsylvania, we have this problem. Pennsylvania never liberalized its voting laws as other states did, but we managed to impose, and it was done without one Democratic vote. Not one Democrat in committee in the House, not one Democrat in the Senate, not one Democrat on the floor in the House, not one Democrat on the floor in the Senate voted for this bill, which required people to show up with a photo ID issued by a government in order to vote. And the Republicans said, we're preventing fraud. And they said, what's the big deal? I mean, people have to show a photo ID to buy a pack of cigarettes. People need to have a photo ID in order to open a banking account. People need to show photo ID to get into certain entertainment venues. So what's the big deal? And the answer to me is, nobody died to open a credit card. People died to vote. And this state shamefully, and we are in court fighting it, shamefully made it very, very difficult for folks, for instance, who don't have a birth certificate. There's lots of people who weren't born in hospitals. They were born at home, they don't have a birth certificate. How can they get a photo ID?
I was born in a log cabin, case in point.
There you go. You would not be able to vote in Pennsylvania if this law goes into effect. The president would not be able to vote.
Obviously, that is a shameful thing. And the fact of the matter is that those who are voting that came up with this law, apparently there must have been some rash of illicit voting because
you would think so.
This.
You would think so.
Pennsylvania has never shown a pattern of discriminatory voting or fraud, which is the reason apparently for the act.
Voter impersonation fraud.
Pennsylvania has no pattern or history of voter fraud. I mean, that's been proven.
And the lawyers
the reason that the Republican Party, not only in Pennsylvania, but in other states like Texas and North Carolina, where they're very stringent in terms of their voting qualifications, the reason was purely political, to make it more difficult for certain ethnic groups to vote. That's always been the case, Madam Representative, where the courts and the legislatures in certain states prevented or attempted to prevent the vote. That's always been the case, and it's always been the province and the priority of African Americans to fight that in the streets, to fight it in the courts, to fight it in public opinion. We can never say because the tide is against us, we just stop.
Well, no, of course, we continue on.
But there's an old, with due respect, there's an old saying, if a man is going across the desert, I pray and hope that there's going to be water, but it's best to water your camel before you start the journey. So I say we must always be vigilant and fight, and not accept.
But I want to interject this. My question to you, President Lincoln, is how do you see this party, this GOP, the grand old party, how do you see them as they exist today versus what you had in mind when you first joined? Because you were Whig before. So
yeah,
how do you feel?
It's interesting to see this party that I joined when it first began to become completely the opposite. It's turned completely 180 degrees around.
With all due respect, I've got to interject at this point.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lincoln.
Yes, sir.
When you were debating Stephen Douglas in your campaign for Senate of Illinois in 1858, you said, and I quote, "I am not, nor have ever been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people.
You know, Mr.
And
Douglas,
I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races,
You know, Mr.
which I
Douglas,
believe will forever forbid the two races living together.
You
in terms
believe the
of
same thing
social
about women.
and political.
He believes the same thing about women.
Not so. But let me just say.
At the time, I said it.
Yes, at the time, but being the very shrewd lawyer and politician that you are, you said in the next breath, on the other hand, the black man is not my equal in many ways, in many respects, but he has the right to eat the bread without the leave of anybody else that he makes from his own hands. He is my equal and equal of any man when he is earning his living.
Now, Mr. Douglas, I'm going to ask you to put a pin in it. We're going to take a break and come back. We will give President Lincoln an opportunity to respond.
Thank you.
Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time.
Are you accusing me of taking advantage?
I'm accusing you of raping her repeatedly. That's what I'm accusing you of. She had no way to say no.
Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across.
I'm Jennifer Burton, producer of Conversations Across Time. Watch us on PhillyCam.
Before the break, President Lincoln, you were addressed by Mr. Douglas about some very specific
Comments that I made, yes.
comments that you made. Now, and I also want to say, because this is a lively conversation, and I want to get Representative Joseph in here, because while you were being attacked, also, Mr. Douglas was being attacked.
Yeah,
so
this is
let's sort this out.
This is a man who takes the help of women, puts feminist on his resume, and when he gets a chance, what does he do? He steps on women's faces. He says, yeah, let's have the black man vote. But who cares about women of any color? It's almost the same as people who came to this country, got help from the Native Americans, and turned around and slaughtered them. You didn't do any better than they.
Absolutely wrong, and I'll tell you why, but if you want the president to respond.
I want the president to respond. If you put a pin in that, we'll come back to you, but I at least wanted to get it out there.
As far as that goes, it's funny you should say that it doesn't do much for women, whereas you were elected to run as vice president under a woman who was running for president on the suffragette party. How do you feel about this?
The Equal Rights Party.
Equal Rights, excuse me.
And as a matter of fact, they endorsed me, and I played no part and didn't campaign at all for that.
Oh, that was a help.
If elected, would you accept the position?
Probably not.
Really, sir?
Absolutely not. The Equal Rights Party would not have gotten elected to the presidency during that election, that campaign. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Well, because women couldn't vote, black people couldn't vote.
Okay,
But
now,
I was appreciative of those ladies. I've always supported women's suffrage. In 1948, at the first Equal Rights Amendment.
Don't yell at me. Don't yell at me.
I'm not yelling. I'm just saying.
You're just used to yelling at women, and I don't like it.
Well, that's an ad hominem attack. You're
That's
attacking me
right.
for speaking.
Don't you yell at me.
Lower?
Yes.
Perhaps more civil tone, sir.
More civil tone. Well,
Yes.
my tone is always civil. I just want the whole world to understand what I'm saying. So I'll say it loud so the whole world can understand what I'm saying. In 1848, at the first Equal Rights Convention, which was called the Seneca Falls Convention,
All right.
Lucretia Mott and her brother stood up against women's suffrage. I stood up and made a speech for women's suffrage that ended up developing a resolution for it. That was a very different process in 1848 than what happened in 1869 in a debate between the United States Congress on black male suffrage. Now, if you want me to address that, I will.
I think
If you want me to talk about black male suffrage, why I changed my position.
Mrs. Roosevelt, who did nothing throughout her career except really promote women of color, white women, perhaps she has something to say about this, because you guys really...
I think the problem here is also that many of these rules were created by the men. I almost want to relate everybody to Shakespeare. The speech from Mercy of Venice, just substitute, hath not a woman eyes, etc. Where this dichotomy came in, I'm not really sure. And why the men...
Because people made bargains in order to get what they wanted and threw under the bus the people who had helped them.
Sure.
Mr. Lincoln did that, Mr. Douglas did that.
They also, that they
In a
fit the
previous
compromise.
discussion, we discovered that Mr. Columbus did that.
Well, may I say, let me make 3 points this time regarding my support for black male suffrage. If you'll allow me, I want to make 3 points.
Very well.
Number one,
Quickly.
I was asked by the president and your associates to recruit African-American male for the military. And I worked to recruit hundreds of black men for the 54th Massachusetts. You know, they fought at Battery Wagner. They even made a movie, Glory, which was produced by Hollywood.
Are you telling me women did not serve?
I asked for leave to make some
We want to let
points.
you make your point,
Thank
sir.
you.
Make your point.
In doing that, 2 of my sons joined the military. Lewis was a sergeant major at Battery Wagner. Point 2, black soldiers came to me and they said, after this war is over, we need the right to vote, to keep strong those gains that we made during the war. Point number 3, who is to say that these brave, steadfast black soldiers who bled and suffered and died at Battery Wagner, at Fort Pillow, at Port Houston, at Milligan's Bed, at the crater at Petersburg, at Richmond, who is to say that they should not have the right to vote first? Now, that doesn't mean...
You're telling me
that does not mean that I do not support women's suffrage. Who is to say, not I? They have earned the right to vote.
I'm not telling you.
They have earned the right to vote first, and that's why I became their advocate in 1860.
And women didn't serve, and women didn't suffer.
No, wait a minute. We've heard your points. I think what you need to hear now is from the ladies, from the women who actually were impacted by your decision. I'm not casting a value judgment, but let us hear how they felt about it.
If I could make one point.
Of course.
During the war, yes, women did help out
They died the same way as men
behind the
do.
scenes, helping with cooking and keeping things for the men, including infirmaries. But yes, there were some incidences during the war where some women would lose their husband, thereby losing all sorts of income, and would,
Lose
believe it or
their
not,
lives.
masquerade as men to be soldiers and serve our country.
Imagine that.
Exactly. And
Why? Because
Whose point are you making?
into the army, so there are at least a half dozen very famous women.
So how come they didn't get a right to vote?
And they were rewarded.
How about giving them the right to vote?
Wait a minute.
They were given pensions. They were given
How about the right to vote?
I want to hear the First Lady. I want to hear your reaction. Because you as someone who was so very involved in women's rights.
well, my point is, even if they were doing things such as doing the cooking and taking care of the household while the men were out serving in the armed forces.
Well, they worked out in the field too.
And in the field, in whatever manner, if they were not there to do that, then first of all, there would be nothing there to fight for to begin with, and second of all, the men wouldn't have been able to do what they did. So
absolutely right.
the equality is right there, even if they weren't getting shot in the field. But they were.
Absolutely right, Ms.
And they were.
It was the women who made sure that the sanitary conditions, they established the sanitary commission with some help from some financiers in New York. They ran the hospitals.
That's right.
You had women to go out and take care of the men in the field.
Without them, where would you have been?
Well, I mean, they
And
played.
so therefore, why should they not have had equal
Let me tell you something.
representation in their government by whom they were governed?
Let me lower my voice and
Oh, good idea.
in a very
I'm for that.
in a very sorrowful way I say this. My good friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who I supported her amendment in 1848. In 1869, she said this. She said that white, college-educated women should have the right to vote before illiterate former slaves. Isn't that class?
Oh, that's one reason why I
Discrimination.
oppose the
Absolutely. Absolutely, but we're not talking to
that's
Elizabeth
what the-
Stanton here, and she was not in a position to make a bargain with the devil. You were, and you did.
Well, we did what was politically, Mr.
Right,
President.
you're a hero.
Politically
That's
reasonable.
part of it. That's
At the time.
hero.
And history shows, with due respect, history shows that Frederick Douglass was right.
About what? Only giving males the right to
About those
vote?
men who fought in the war having the right
You
to vote
can never,
first.
there is no such thing as half a civil right.
No, you're
Half of
absolutely
the
right.
people
The
don't vote.
15th Amendment guaranteed African-American men who fought
That's
that
half
war.
a civil right.
Wait a minute, I thought you said, I thought you quoted that it said
Amendment to the United
citizens.
States Constitution.
Did you not quote that it said citizens?
Yes, the
Well,
right
I'm a
of
citizen.
citizens.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
No,
Should
we're
not be
citizens.
denied the right to
To
vote.
vote.
Now, here's what's interesting about this, and I just want to bring this back. So we narrow this down to something that's very similar to something that happened in 2008. And that is that certainly there was a time when there was an entire population who felt that they were called upon to make a decision between a qualified white woman and a state senator. Oh, I'm sorry, and a U.S. senator who was running for the highest office in the land. That was a choice that blacks had to make, and that's a choice that we're still having to make. We're not able to get to that during this segment, but I invite you all back. I want you to think about that because, again, with conversations across time, what we are doing is we are recognizing just how important history is, just how important the discussions that happen now actually dovetail and go back to what happened during the lifetime of you, Mr. Douglas, of you, President Lincoln, and of course, we look at you being a later person, First Lady Roosevelt, but you certainly have some interesting ideas about what should have happened. And for our current day politician, former politician, Representative Babette.
Always a politician.
Always a politician. You
Elected or not.
Exactly.
A closing remark?
Thank you.
I think
Those who forget the past are only doomed to repeat it. This is why we should study history.
And we welcome you back again to join us for our next segment of Conversations Across Time. Wow, you get to see just how interesting and just how important these conversations are. Thank you very much to my guests, Representative Joseph, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, President Lincoln, and Frederick Douglass. We look forward to inviting you back to continue this conversation across time. Thank you.
Conversations across time, 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 across time. Conversations 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 across time.